My mum's tried to FaceTime me like 3 times. I was like, stop it.
Not now.
Like, Mum, I'm doing a podcast. I'm busy and important. Go away.
Welcome to episode 5 of Jermyn Street Theatre's podcast, Prompt Corner. Today we're talking about the Swedish dramatist August Strindberg with playwright Howard Brenton, director Tom Littler, and actors Charlotte Hamblin and James Sheldon, reuniting them all from their 2017 and 2019 performances of Miss Julie at Jermyn Street Theatre. I'm your host, Ciaran Walsh. Enjoy the podcast.
Am I just going to be edited out of this? Have you just asked me for courtesy?
Unfortunately, Charlie Hamblin couldn't make it, so
she popped out. Oh,
lost her again.
Curious.
So yeah, should we start going around? James, should we start with you? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm James Sheldon, and I played Jean in Miss Julie.
Great. And how about you, Charlotte?
Hi, I'm Charlotte Hamblin, and I played Miss Julie in Miss Julie.
Tom?
I'm Tom, as you've pointed out, and I directed 4 Strindberg-related shows. Dances of Death at the Gate Theatre, Miss Julie and Creditors, and The Blinding Light, all 4 of which were either adapted or written by Howard.
And that leads us on to you, Howard.
Yes, and I'm the adapter who did all that, heavy lifting for Tom.
Sounds a bit begrudging.
Not at all. No, it was a delight.
Perhaps we could start with you, Howard. I'd be really interested. So we're all unified here by Strindberg, by these adaptations of Strindberg, by The Blinding Light as well, Tom and Howard, which is about Strindberg himself. And so I wonder if I might start, Howard, by asking you what you find so compelling about Strindberg.
I think it's because it's completely unlike the kind of thing I write, and I'm not like that as a writer at all. I'm just so interested in the fact that he had a world view. He wasn't just a professional writer. He was very unlike Ibsen. You know, Ibsen and Strindberg are just 2 different planets on either side of the theatrical solar system, really. Whereas Ibsen's work is coherent, it develops over the years, it's a magnificent cathedral of work. Strindberg's is like a smashed up ruin full of some magnificent rooms, almost without structure, you know, although there are different eras in it. So they're very different. And there was something about his voice that really interested me. I think it has influenced me in the last few plays, you know. Something about, although he was a chaotic man in many ways, you know, and whether he was a good or a bad man is really up for grabs, you know, discussion. When he wrote drama, there was something authentic about it, something human. That interested me a lot, you know.
And I suppose there's something intensely human about that, The Blinding Light, in terms of your work with Tom. This is back in 2017 at Jermyn Street Theatre. And I wonder if, Tom, you could speak about kind of that production in particular, the way that Howard's put the pressure on that kind of almost chaos, that really, really compelling aspect to Strindberg's autobiographical kind of life and the way that influences work. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about how that manifests itself in The Blinding Light.
yeah. I mean, The Blinding Light was sort of born out of necessity, in the sense that Howard and I have been talking about a biographical drama about Strindberg, but I said he could only have 4 actors, which was for economic reasons, not art ones. And so it then became about the search for a kind of like a moment in Strindberg's life, from which lots of other things could explode. So The Blinding Light was about what's called the Inferno period, during which Strindberg had a an extended nervous breakdown, you could call it, during which he had stopped writing, and he was heavily into the occult, and he thought that he was going to discover the secret of making gold, the alchemic secrets of that. And so from that drama, Howard wrote a play that was able to go kind of both backwards and forwards in Strindberg's life. So we were able to kind of pack in lots of the biographical story because he was having visions and hallucinations. And so it was possible that, I mean, Strindberg really, he had people walking through walls, didn't he? And he was having sex with people who weren't there. And I mean, it was a pretty trippy time, wasn't it, Howard? I mean,
it was extraordinary. Yes, he so we were able to have him meet not only old wives but wives that he was yet to meet, you know, from the future. So his future and his past were colliding in his head. Strindberg wrote a book about it called Inferno, you know, and like all of his autobiographies, it's sort of unreliable. You don't know quite how he was able to. He ended up using that period really because it was the great watershed. Miss Julie was just before it. Then the plays after it were very, very different. The relationship with alchemy was interesting because it was as if he was trying to reach some kind of personal reformation, and it went hand in hand with turning his theatre inside out. I mean, the man had already written a great period of revolutionary theatre. Creditors and The Father and Miss Julie were revolutionary in their time. No one had ever seen anything like it. They were far more intense and more dangerous than what Ibsen was doing, really. And he threw all that away. And 4 years later, after the breakdown in Paris, emerged writing stranger, more mystical work.
Put pressure on that. So it's interesting that you bring up that alchemy, because obviously that's what's so compelling about that, The Blinding Light. I think this is really interesting. I think, Howard, you've said before in interviews that there is this, writing has this amazing communication with the dead, with this kind of, with characters that you're not necessarily kind of intimate with on a personal level, but you know have some sort of relation to you. And I wonder if we could speak about, if Charlie and James, you could speak a little bit about how, so this notion of adapting plays for new audiences, bringing up things from the past to the future. I wonder how the process of rehearsal coming to acting for a play like Miss Julie, how that has that sort of communication with characters that you don't know or that you come to know, or so what's that sort of alchemical process of talking to the dead, as it were?
Well, for me, instantly they're the same. There's no like, so to modernize the, because obviously it's written in a different language and Howard had it translated from the original transcript of it or text of it, and created this beautiful thing. But the whole like working of it is the same. You just got to read it and go through it, and it's all there. Everything that's in it, everything that you need is written within it. You don't need any of the you don't need to think outside the box in that then in that sense, especially for Strindberg, because if you start thinking outside of anything that isn't the writing that he's put down on the page, you're lost. Then you're not coming back. You're sort of, you have to follow what he's put down, even though a lot of it is, as we've discussed about him in rehearsals, that a lot of the stuff off stage wasn't quite finished or complete. He had a big thing about not quite. He didn't think outside of the box in that aspect. It was all on stage, all in the moment, in what was happening.
Yes, that's true. I mean, plot was almost an irritant to
find out what to do. Yeah, what this person leaves and then comes back an hour later, having been to somewhere else.
Yes, I know.
You can't get to within an hour. You know,
who creditors is a nightmare, particularly.
Creditors is a nightmare.
Who took what ferry when could drive you mad. Yeah.
Who knows? But that's what I mean. So anything
it doesn't
that
matter somehow.
Anything that isn't there, don't think about. It was what I discovered. Just do what is there on the page.
Yeah, I think that's the sort of same. I think with both James and I felt if I was very familiar with Miss Julie as a play. I first read it when I was 12. I'm quite obsessed with it, and semi-hounded Tom for an audition. But I think with James and I, we were both, if you go into this play thinking about the magnitude of what you have to achieve, you wouldn't go on stage. I think you'd be too scared.
Yeah.
And with Strindberg is you just have to play moment to moment, because it's a war, it's a word game, it's a tennis match. And if you think beyond, it's the best test of it, and sort of honing of acting skills, because there's no choice but to play beat to beat, and be completely in the moment, or you just wouldn't go on. I think.
And with his ongoing sort of thing that isn't quite linear, you have to do everything that a human has to do in a lifetime in 45 minutes until you get to the point of what's happening within the first 45 minutes. So you've got to go through all the emotions that he's written down. But you've got, I mean, I don't know if Charlie will back me up, but we did loads of, and Tom corrected us, but we did loads of like, so why are we doing this? And Charlie will be like, we don't understand what's going on. Why are we moving from this bit to this bit? And Tom will be like, because you are. That's it.
You are. Correcting in the world.
You are.
That's it.
It says it in the script, and so I suppose they said it.
That's what happens next. So off you go. And you just can't question that. You just have to go with it. But it's so, once you've got past the fact that you don't understand why you've done that, it's so human for 1 minute to be super happy and having a lovely time and having a joke, for someone to say something that isn't an insult and you find it slightly insulting, and then for all of a sudden to that whole thing to switch right. That's so human to do, and he writes that in the writing so much and so well that you don't clock it when you're reading it or when you're doing it for the first time.
It's like the opposite of how we're trained to act.
100%.
Yeah.
And I actually briefly mentioned this to Tom the other day, and I think most people listening probably have watched Normal People on BBC, and I was watching it, and just so much of Miss Julie was resonated in it, and what is unsaid and what is not communicated could have changed everything, but they didn't say it, they didn't do it, and so much of Miss Julie is the acting of the physical doesn't match the verbal, and the sort of class difference in Normal People as well was so, it really felt like the closest thing I've seen to like a modern touch on what we always found quite sort of difficult was trying to make the stakes high enough as to why Miss Julie would sort of take her own life at the end of it all. And I think Normal People was almost like a modern version of that. And it felt the pain in watching their scenes was as painful as I think we found it. When we were really in it, it's excruciating. You want to ram their heads together and be like, "What the hell are you doing?" But I felt like it's weird. I've thought a lot about Miss Julie recently, probably because of Normal People, and so that's sort of, anyway, tangent.
Yeah. And do you remember, I mean, Howard, this is probably, do you remember this? All the three Strindbergs, not The Blinding Light, but Dances of Death and Miss Julie and Creditors, the process of rehearsing was always like weirdly light-hearted. Remember, the rehearsal room for all three were always like ridiculous. And we did Miss Julie twice, and all three times everything was always stupid and full of jokes, and it was just kind of choreography, really, just line to line to moment to moment. And then it was only when you ran it that you went, oh shit, this is
you can't do that. You can't do it 8 times in a day.
Honestly, I have never laughed so much in my life. The day we did the scene, Tom was like, why don't we do it again? The bit where Miss Julie's just about to go out and kill herself. I think we did it about 17 times. But that's the day I've laughed most in any rehearsal. I was crying with laughter, except maybe the attempt at the sex scene. That was just the funniest thing.
That was always a good one.
That was
it's sort of a tragic genius, you see, that's lying underneath. You don't think of him as a tragic writer, but there's a tragic genius in Strindberg, which is a kind of hilarity deep hilarity underneath.
Yeah.
Which is weird to put your hands on, you know. I mean, you love it. You love it when they tear each other to bits, particularly in Dance of Death.
Yeah.
You know, in Creditors, the grinding into each other is sort of hilarious, because the machine is getting tighter and tighter, and it's the audience feel curiously encouraged and lightheaded at the end. So that was great, you know, having seen these people tear each other to bits. Let's all go and have a great meal or go straight to the pub. It's a very weird sense. It's a kind of tragic celebratory thing lying underneath the actual dialogue more than any plot, or, you know.
Well, maybe
you think so, or am I getting
no?
pretentious?
I think you're right. I think loads of people identify with it. They're like, thank God it's not just me and my relationships have these blazing rounds. But I think there is something. And I was thinking a lot about Miss Julie as well since lockdown, because I was like, holy shit, if you're locked in a difficult relationship.
Oh, God, yeah.
But it reminds me of Miss Julie because they are trapped in and they can't get out.
Yes.
And
it's a midsummer night you can never leave. Yes.
And it sort of was, I mean, I'm isolating alone, thank God, for anyone who might have potentially have isolated with me. But I was thinking, gosh, you know, it would be, if you're in an unhappy relationship, God, the fizzing. And I think there's something about Miss Julie that is kind of, it's like a tennis match, and it is so brilliant. And like, that's why when John McEnroe in tennis kicks off, we bloody love it when he goes nuts. I think there is something within us that we love seeing people tear each other apart. That's why stuff like Succession is so successful. And also, I think people identify with it.
They're always trapped. Aren't they?
Yeah. And there's the thing, how can I break out of this? Can I break out of this? I cannot break out of this. It goes on, I mean, particularly in Dance of Death, you know, they're asking, can I break out of this? Particularly the wife. But you can't, you've got to return to it because it's your given station. Why should I be given a station? I don't want a station in life. This is your station, you know, and which goes on in Miss Julie, doesn't it? You know, it's part of that winding up that goes on in his writing.
Yeah. And Dance of Death, it's a couple, it's their, what did we make it, their 40th wedding anniversary or 30th? I can't remember. We played around with the time scale.
That's a great idea.
But it was Michael Pennington and Linda Marlowe trapped in this on their wedding anniversary.
That island, which was a plague island, wasn't it? Yes. Oh God, it was a quarantine island. What's more?
Yeah.
Yes.
And they just tearing lumps out of each other, and it had this weird thing as well that the audience was completely split, often generationally, between people who've either found it hilarious and quite bracing, or the most traumatizing, frightening thing they'd ever seen in their lives. Either this is you know, quite encouraging, or it's the most terrifying vision of the future ever.
I think we had that
young
with
couple being ashen from the Gate Theatre.
We had that with Miss Julie. There were some nights, and we play it relatively the same every night, unless we were being a bit rogue. Unless Tom wasn't there. There were some nights where they would just laugh their heads off the whole way through. We were like, what is going on? And then there would be nights where there's not a single laughter, and they look ashen-faced and they're traumatized by it. So it's really weird that effect Strindberg has sort of kind of consistently through his work, that it kind of divides, and it's really dark. People laugh when they recognize themselves and things, and when they're uncomfortable as well. I think.
I wanted to ask whether both of you found, coming from the 2017 production of Miss Julie to the 2019 one, what your experiences were in that changing period. I mean, 2018 was for a lot of people that sort of really, really public Me Too sort of exposure, etc., etc. And obviously the play in some way deals with that idea of being trapped, that idea of being kind of in something that you can't get out of. How, you know, coming back to that in 2019, was that a different experience when we're talking about audience reactions? Did people react differently to it?
Definitely, yeah.
I mean, we're speaking about it a lot, and people's different reactions to different stuff. Whereas even in that short amount of time in 2017, Me Too hadn't happened, or it was starting to happen.
Yeah,
so,
just did when Weinstein came out just as we were finishing it ish.
That was it. So there was stuff in the run that was, I mean, still brazenly laughed at through being uncomfortable, and being and still like a socially okay to belly laugh at. And then when in the 2019 production, there was that same stuff landed the same with the audience, but the reaction was different, due to everybody obviously, being made aware of what was happening in the Me Too movement and stuff. So yeah, there was a difference, I think, definitely, and also we were more aware of it.
We were much more aware of it. Yeah, I think it's an odd one as well, and I think mental health has been talked about way more openly, even in the last couple of years since that. So, where there were comments, I think, in 2017. Oh gosh, Miss Julie's insufferable, and gosh, I wouldn't listen to her. Like, what an idiot, what an entitled posh girl, and that sort of stopped, I think, in second time round. And I think Jean became slightly less sympathetic, not from anything that we did, but I think just from the way people were nervous, and the play became more difficult to watch because people were uncomfortable to watch it, and I think we certainly felt that. And but I think it's weird just having sort of a couple of years away from something. I definitely felt that there was a lot more. In the later one, Jean and Kristen's relationship was much more loving. So when she comes in, because we had different actresses, and I think so.
We should just for anyone who didn't see, we should sort of acknowledge that was a really big difference, wasn't it? Because Isabella Ivanovich, who did it the first time, and then Dorothea Maya Bennett, who did it the second time, because it was then doubling into creditors, would extremely different Kristens, and Kristen speaks in her silence a lot. I mean, that must have felt completely different. Like,
James the dynamic of the relationship,
betraying each Kristen.
There was a lot more for Jean to lose, because it felt like in the second time we did it, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, James, but there was obviously there was a different dynamic between you and Dot, and it was very loving and familiar, and it felt that Miss Julie was destroying more for Jean. So in a way, there was a whole different journey for that, and it was more devastating as well for Jean, I think. I don't know, but that's what I saw coming in. But that's
Did you feel in the second time that I sort of thought, oh my God, Julie was prepared to make it at the end, was prepared to go, and that his cowardice, having claimed the male power and privilege, and always said, I'm the man, even though I'm of a lower class, I claim the man's right. His cowardice, and that he could not break his fear of the more powerful man above, her father, that I thought that was much stronger. His cowardice and her courage seemed more emphasized the second time round. I think because of the Me Too, what had been happening with Me Too, and you had this different reading of it, which of course is just like what happens with great plays. They're a bit prism-like. You shake the prism up and the pattern's slightly different, although the colours are the same.
It certainly felt more devastating.
Is that right? Yeah.
It felt more devastating, I think.
Yeah.
Rather than the first time, it was, a bit of a whirlwind and it was traumatic, but this was really, it was really upsetting, I think, in a way for both of them, rather than just watching a woman have a breakdown and it all go wrong.
Yeah.
It felt really upsetting. I was a lot more affected by it as an actor second time round.
Did you feel? Oh, she could make it.
100%. I think they would have gone off. I think they would have killed each other, but I think they would have gone together. I think she believed him and thought they had a life, whereas I think first time round she didn't really ever believe it.
No.
Yeah, I think because of that, because of the Me Too movement and everything that brought, is that the choice, for me anyway, playing it anyway, the choice was always Jean's in my head in the first one as to what happens, and then obviously everything changed and all that, you know, and then the second time around there were two choices to be made, and I was at the mercy of another choice, and Julie made the choice to be like, we can do it, and then the ball was back in my court, and then the fear. I remember doing it and thinking that the fear is so much more this time round, because
yes, we should tell listeners that there's this power of the father and dread of her father returning, and throughout the show his boots sit on the stage, which Jean at times polishes and then polishes again right at the end. Is that right? Yes, it is.
Well, that's James.
They're so powerful, and they get bigger and bigger as you watch, and more sinister.
Yeah.
Charles Dance. We cast Charles Dance, didn't we? Sorry. In our head,
Charles Dance was our casting for the Baron. Consistently for both productions, he kept his mark. But you know, it was James's stroke of genius idea that the final moment of the play would not be the Miss Julie exit, which is what's written, but that after she's gone, Jean would then pick up the boots and start polishing, and so that's what we blacked out on.
Oh, James, that was you, was it? It's not in the text, is it?
I don't want
to. Great.
Do you know what I mean? It's just
Strindberg would have been delighted. He always said, "Oh, put it in if you want it." He was very loose. It was strange. Yeah. He was very loose about that. He said, "Oh, if you don't like it, just change it." It's like,
we felt as actors definitely. With working with Howard and Tom, I know that you guys were open and loose with it, so we felt like there was no choice. That I never felt like I was told to do anything, which is the mark of great words, great directors, when you're just kind of feel like you're organically let to do your own thing, but obviously heavily reined in. I remember when I went to smack in a dress rehearsal, I hit a saucepan off the wall, and Tom brilliantly, rather than never telling me to do that again, which any sane director would, he said, right, how do we glue it down so if she does decide to do it again, it won't fall off. And I think that's the mark of a good director, is they just like, we'll let the actors follow their instincts and we'll deal with the consequences.
We took every saucepan on the set and cable tied it to the set, so that in case you ever took the spontaneous decision to hit a saucepan again, it wouldn't go anywhere.
Gosh, I broke a lot, didn't I? James cleared up. Thank God he was playing my footman, because he cleared up so much of my mess.
This my main job was remember the words, say them in order, and then clean up.
How many glasses did we lose? Ooh.
There was a count kept on glassware lost over the course of both productions.
Sorry,
that
Jermyn
didn't
Street.
survive two productions. Theatre by the Lake and Jermyn Street, both with smashed glass everywhere.
Yeah, if that came out my wages, I'd be on nothing.
It was a room in which we were allowed to act in, and that's sort of Strindberg. That's what he wrote. Like the whole start of Miss Julie, even then when he wrote it, was 10 minutes of someone cooking.
Loved it.
Which was just unheard of. It just never done before. And it's just mad to think that a lot of things start with that kind of thing now. A lot of things start with someone doing something. It's so plays and TV programs and films start with action rather than words. And that idea that he had has now been taken on as an idea that works across all these genres, because it's so intriguing. It's so intriguing to watch somebody be normal.
It was even more powerful in its first performances, because it was a cook.
Yeah.
And said, "Oh, we're sitting here," and you can imagine a bourgeois audience, who like avant-garde theatre, but they're a bourgeois audience. They're in evening dress, and they're sitting there watching a cook, which just seemed outlandish. Why are we sitting here watching a cook who's saying nothing? She's just cooking
for ages.
But Tom and the whole team created this room where we could play, where we could be, where we could, you know, if we wanted to flip a table, we could flip a table. If we wanted to rip down a sink, we could rip down a sink. Obviously, we wouldn't, because it costs a lot of money to replace.
We tried.
We tried a few times.
Tried.
You know, and if we wanted to, we could do that. And there were knives and forks and pots and pans and spices, and it was actual spices. And you know, both Christians would they had to cook me from raw kidney on stage, from raw kidney, cook me every night, and I would eat that kidney on stage. And that would all be the first, but they'd spice it with different spices every night just to mix it, but because it was all there available. So if they wanted to have a dill kidney, they could have a dill kidney, and I could eat it, that dill. So just that, just like I mean, honestly, it is sort of unheard of in the theatre world, and especially, you know, one that's not to insult it, but so is that small as Jermyn Street, and such a small operation, to decide to do that for a performance is just above and beyond. I think really paid off in terms of realistic settings for. I mean, down to the fact that there's wisteria all over the theatre, both at Theatre by the Lake and Jermyn Street, and then wisteria smell was pumped into the theatre, to the auditorium. So like all of it was built towards that, and I think that is Strindberg.
And you deserve an Olivier for eating all that kidney.
I'll take one.
Wonderful Louis Whitemore with designs for
Queen,
Julianne Predators, both beautiful.
Yes,
and
brilliant.
Cherry Truelock's designs and Emily Stewart's designs for The Blinding Light, and James Perkins on Dances of Death. I mean, we got lucky on all of those shows with people who created really real worlds in the case of the 3 Strindberg plays, and then a kind of like a phantasmagorical Ingmar Bergman trippy world for the Blinding Light. James, but I just suddenly wanted to ask you, because I never have. Did being in Creditors feel really different from being in Miss Julie? I mean, clearly a totally different character, but
playing. I should have mentioned that at the beginning, shouldn't I? I also played. You can add this in later. I also played Adolf in Creditors. Obviously, the character was named before that name had any kind of history.
Good point.
But Adolf in Creditors, and totally different. Weirdly, they're written. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Howard, but they're written quite close together. Creditors and Julie.
Yes,
right?
they are. Yes, they were.
Yes.
Summer, I think. Oh, they were written on that mad summer when they were in the
castle.
Weird.
Yeah. So
I've always wanted to do a period drama about that summer.
Yeah. And they had these experiences, and one of them was Julie. Essentially, there's a story that sort of correlates with Julie, and then the other one is obviously with his wives, which I think maybe inspired Creditors. But playing it was totally different. It feels like the other half to Julie, if you like. It feels like Julie is the dark and real and grit. And open-hearted wretch that he wanted to write that summer, and then Creditors is all the stuff that he was feeling and bundled into a story, and it's just it felt a lot less dark, even though it was dark, but it wasn't as dark as Julie, and it felt a lot more linear and sectioned, which I found very odd, but yet still with that, as we were talking about at the beginning, yet still with that same doesn't make sense. You feel this thing, then you don't, then you do, then you might, then you won't, then you can't. And that, so it's still with that same feeling, but with weirdly sort of structured moments. I don't know what the history is of how he wrote it and why he wrote it, but that's what it felt like to do. But yeah, very different to play, and weirdly a lot lighter at moments, a lot lighter. Even though Julie did have its funny bits and bits where people laughed and jokes that were made, but kind of just felt a bit lighter, a bit more, I don't know, tailored toward not that part of his life. Maybe he had enough of writing about that part of his life because he wrote Miss Julie, which I imagine hurt. So maybe he wrote something that wasn't quite as, but still pretty dark.
Yeah, and watching Adolf, like Howard's face be kind of ground into by Gustav, which David Sturzaker did so brilliantly, and just like a kind of beautiful engineer just unpicks this man.
Yeah. Well,
Strindberg's really interested in is like how is always interested in like how one person can have power over another.
Yeah, totally.
I sometimes think everyone has their pin code, and like, you know, one of our like responsible things to do as humans is like not to use other people's pin codes.
Yeah.
Like that's the mark of a cruel person, isn't it? It's like if you enter it. And he's fascinated by like what happens if you just keep putting the passwords in.
Yeah.
And Gustav just sees Adolf, who is, spoiler, married to his ex-wife, and is determined to completely dismantle their marriage, which he does clinically, like with pleasure, like a surgeon might.
So in Julie, there's two people in it. There's two people. There's three people in it, but there's the two people obviously that are in it most is that they're the same. They're of the same level. They're of different class and different backgrounds, but they're of the same. They're on the same level. They can manipulate each other. They can hurt each other. They
give as good as they get, don't they?
As good as they get to each other. It's totally equal on that front. But Creditors, there's three different people with three very different abilities, level of ability. And Adolf comes at the bottom of that run, I think. So for those sort of comparisons, we're playing one character that's completely aware of what's happening and you know, having shots fired at him and then adjusting and firing a shot back and coming back and being hit, and then Adolf just mainly sort of getting dragged along by everything. So this is quite a challenge to play both of those things, to play one thing one way, especially when we did it back to back, one thing one night and then switch the other night to play.
We should introduce you sometime to Christopher Ravenscroft, who played Curt in Dance of Death.
Yeah.
Because Curt is sort of the same part.
Right, okay.
Yes.
Adolf. I mean, what he does is he wanders in as if he's like an innocent who's just like accidentally wandered into the lion's den.
Yeah.
And he thinks that he might have a go at dismantling their marriage.
I know. Glint in the eyes. Oh God! Yes,
that's very
Linda. You know, stop.
I mean,
somebody who walks in and decides to destroy something. That's very.
I think that he was trying to write about evil in the Creditors, and that Gustav is evil, and that he represents a kind of human negativity.
Yeah.
Which Strindberg was highly paranoid at times. You know, depending on what substance or drink he was taking, you know, in that particular era. But he was highly paranoid, and he feared the kind of negative, the dismantler, the second rate, you know. And I think that's what Gustav represents in the play. He almost does it casually, and at the end he says, "Oh, they really did love each other." With the inference, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe I shouldn't have turned up because, you know, oh well, you know, it's casual, second rate. And I think that was evil for, you know, he was attempting a portrait of what he saw as human evil.
But then he always leaves room, doesn't he, for actors. I sense that he loves actors because, you know, I agree with everything you've just said, Howard, and then David Sterzak is able to take that final movement for Gustav, and suddenly you find yourself feeling sorry for this.
Yes, because he says, actually, I failed. I have failed. I'm a failure. He suddenly acknowledges his own failure. Having sort of devil.
And there's this kind of animal pain there.
Yeah.
And he's always kind of spacious somehow in the writing.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about how that kind of changes in performance and changes in reception modify the way in which people see those plays, whether it be the same play. I'd be really interested to know whether, Howard, that changes, like you talked earlier about shifts and how like your adaptation process, does that change over a period of time when, you know, history is different, as it were, and do you have to adapt things in different ways basically to appeal to the ways in which things are being received, or with Strindberg does the work take care of itself? Because it seems like the way you all speak about it, it has such a life of its own.
Well, no, I did it with Agnes Broom, who did the literal translation, who's a Swedish scholar, and the aim was to do something impossible, that is to present what he actually wrote, which is impossible because it was written in a different, the cultural shifts are enormous in the last 100+ years. But nevertheless, to do that, to try and get to his voice, again, that would be impossible, but that was the attempt was. And so I had strict rules, never take anything away from what was there, never put anything in. Every image, every sentiment will be exactly, would be in the original, and I never added, The exception in a way was Dance of Death, because it was Tom's idea to get into one evening the two parts of the play, which would take, I don't know, 4 hours or more to do if you did it in real time, which did mean a restitching, cutting at times. But with the other two plays, no, I don't like the I thought try if you deconstruct, if you try and update, if you try and set it in Margate amongst the stink of the seaweed of that town, you will lose something by attempting to update it, and you'll lose an authentic voice, which is what we've been talking about today, really. So no, it was to do the impossible, to do it straight.
Yeah, Dances of Death required. It needed a lot more intervention, didn't it? Particularly in the second half, because it was partly length, but also that's the play, I think, where you can see him moving out of his sort of naturalist first half into his expressionist second half of his career. Because the first half is exactly like Miss Julie or Creditors. It's 3 people bottled up, fighting it out. But then the second half, suddenly it introduces 3 more characters, their children, and he starts writing these scenes that are like 6 lines long, and then another scene that's 4 lines long, and we had to find a totally different theatrical language for the second half. And also the plotting in the second half of Dances of Death was bananas.
Yes.
Do you remember sitting in that little tiny office at the gate?
Yeah.
What felt like days, but was probably only one very long afternoon, but just trying to work out what the hell happened with all of, because he's not bothered about what happened in the past or off stage, except insofar as it's affecting you now.
Yes.
So he'd just go, well, you poisoned the well at the quarantine station. And, 2 pages before you've been told there is no quarantine station or something like that. And you go, right, well, would you like a tidy up here, August? Or should we just go with it? Or what?
And he'll say, no.
Yeah.
No need. It's fine. Don't worry. Carry on.
It's so weird, that, isn't it? Because we're so used to these things being tidy. The lying is really interesting as well, isn't it? In all the plays, they sort of lie, but they don't know they're lying. Do you remember that? It's kind of weird. They just make stuff up and it feels true.
Well, your premise in the rehearsal, your whole idea that it's true when they say it, and then it might be immediately not true after. But when they say it, everything's true. So
that's very strong in Creditors, isn't it?
They think that for the moment, and then they don't. So actually, when you say the lying, maybe it's Strindberg lying, but the characters certainly don't ever really lie. It's more sort of, that's how I feel now, and then all of a sudden, oh no, I don't feel like that at all. And so you can, so again, as an actor playing it, you can play everything for truth, real. That
taught me loads about directing most plays, actually. Mm-hmm. I'm really strict now about those conversations where, that rehearsal room conversation starts where you're like, oh, is it true? Are they adjusting the truth? Are you masking something? And I'm like, I think it's actually quite rare in human interaction that someone takes a story, consciously adjusts it, tells a different story. I mean, normally you just say it and it comes out, and then it may or may not be quite match the facts. But, that's, and Howard had a word for it, which was in Dances of Death, and then I think we used it again in Blinding Light, which was fabulate. You make up
Yes.
stories and
Yes, fabulate.
fabulate. Is that a real word?
Maybe a coinage. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's kind of amazing to play and to see played, like that story of Jean's in the first half of Miss Julie that turns out that it's his big seduction story, isn't it? And then it turns out to be completely untrue, or at least he says it's untrue.
Yeah, might not be. We don't know.
Oh, it's definitely made up. I know men like Jean. It's a lie. And bless her, she fell for it for 0.5 seconds. We've all been there, Jules. We've all been there.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Prompt Corner. That was, as ever, such a pleasure. Next week, we will be speaking to lighting designers. Until then, stay safe.